India is getting ready to welcome the world as the G20 Summit is about to kick off. I'm Barkha, you're with the Mojo story. Of course, our special focus now is looking ahead at the big G20 Summit, a literal gathering of world leaders in India's national capital. While Delhi is all dressed up, there is going to be hard questions and hard negotiations at the summit. And the big question, of course, is whether there will be a joint statement at the end. The missing person in the room is, of course, Xi Jinping, the Chinese leader who has chosen to send the Chinese premier to the summit instead. Is this a sign of intractable, complex, tense state of affairs between India and China? Remember, Xi Jinping and Prime Minister Modi did meet on the sidelines of BRICS just a couple of weeks ago. What do we make of Xi Jinping's absence? And also, what do we make of it in the context of the new provocative Chinese map, a Chinese map that has now led to Japan being the newest country to object to China's neo-imperialist ambitions as clearly captured in this map. All of this as a standoff continues at line of actual control in eastern Ladakh for actually almost 3 years now. There's a lot to talk about as we look today in this special program at the China factor and what we may expect from the G20 at the end of these 3 days. Let me introduce our panel of very special experts today. Joining us on the program is Hasnain, who's of course one of India's best-known journalists. She's also the diplomatic editor of The Hindu. Always good to see you, Hasnain. Also joining us is military veteran, former General Office Commanding of the 15th Corps, General Hasnain. Always a pleasure, sir. Also joining us is one of India's best-known diplomats, Ambassador Dilip Sinha. Welcome back to the program, sir. And also welcoming back to the Mojo Story this evening is Harsh Pant, who's of course a strategic affairs analyst with the Observer Research Foundation. Welcome, everybody. I'll start with you, Ambassador Dilip Sinha. As somebody who actually thought that it was time for India to walk out of the SCO, because, why be part of a forum that is led by the Chinese? What do you make of the absence of Xi Jinping? How do you read it? And let me ask you, do you believe Xi Jinping is making a mistake here, or what is the message he's sending?
Well, the temptation has always been, the initial reactions were that this is being done by Xi Jinping to snub India. He does not want to come into a forum where India takes center stage and a place where Prime Minister Modi will be holding forth. His meeting with Prime Minister Modi at Johannesburg, well, hardly a meeting, it was a conversation, did not go well. There were controversies immediately thereafter. And in the military level talks, there was no progress at all. So all this would make one feel that Xi is not coming because of the India factor. But some other reports seem to indicate that there is a possibility that there are internal problems in China because of which Xi Jinping is not coming. And this report emanates from Japan. It's a Nikkei report saying that at a secret conclave of the Communist Party leaders, Xi was pulled up for various things within China. We all know that China's economy is not doing too well. Now, if you look at Xi's boycott of not going to the East Asia and the ASEAN summit, that is right in the backyard of China. He's avoided that. And even at the BRICS summit, his participation was there, but he left. He did not participate in the business forum, and he left pretty early. So all this seems to indicate that things are not going well within China for Xi Jinping. But his not coming here is a loss because so many leaders were looking forward to meeting him. Apart from President Biden, I believe even the Japanese Prime Minister was keen to talk to him because of the confrontation they had, not only because of the map, but also because of that Fukushima water issue.
Let me bring in General Hasnain. Do you think that this is internal dynamics, of China at play, as Ambassador Sinha suggests. And, we've seen before also reports that Xi Jinping is, facing trouble, is facing the heat at home. But that last time around, that didn't turn out to be correct. This time, we don't know. Or do you believe that it's about not actually sharing a stage where India and the Prime Minister as host to this G20 summit would clearly be the person and the country under the arc lights?
See, Barkha, I tend to agree with Ambassador Sinha first, but I'm tempted to go along with what you subsequently said in your statement just now. There's somewhere a combination of the two which is at play. There is no doubt, at the cost of repetition, the fact that Xi Jinping did not attend the last day of the summit, the BRICS summit, and actually his speech had to be read out by the Commerce Minister, was an indication itself. Besides that, many other things have been at play, and this latest report which has come from the Japanese media about him being pulled up by the previous various leaders of the CPC appears to be something which is cementing that perception. I think it all started from quite far back, almost 3 months back, when you had the removal of the foreign minister and the return of Mr. Wang as the foreign minister. That was perhaps the start point of this whole thing. But again, one is tempted to also feel that China is not a nation who knows diplomacy too well. China has not played the India card well at all. And in many other cases, you find the entire policy with the ASEAN, with Japan, with South Korea, things haven't been too rosy. So the Chinese aren't adept at playing this kind of a diplomacy. They think they're on the path of growth. Comprehensive national power is increasing. That gives them a right to actually bully the rest of the world. Actually, this is the time when what Deng Xiaoping had mentioned in 1978, right? Keep a big stick and continue to talk peace. That is the policy which China should continue to be following at the moment until the 2035, the timeline which Xi Jinping himself has set for himself for China to attain ultimate power as such. But somewhere in the middle, things seem to have gone wrong. We are tempted to also think that it could be the India factor which is playing a role in this. I wrote on this, I analyzed on it, but within 48 hours, I started changing my mind because I did think that Xi Jinping has met Prime Minister Modi, maybe not met him very passionately at different meetings, but he's met him. And his presence here may have actually been good for China. Lots of things could have been discussed with different nations with whom the Chinese have got differences, but most of all with India, where an attempt is being made to try and transparently show that things are improving, while actually they are not on the ground.
Yeah, that last bit is very important because, Hasnain, when the two leaders, Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping, did meet on the sidelines of the BRICS summit, there was controversy attached to that meeting. The Chinese made it a point to say that meeting was at the request of the Indians. India, of course, rebutted that sharply and then reinforced the situation at the line of actual control. Do you think the answer to why Xi Jinping is not attending the G20 lies in that meeting that was behind closed doors? There were no photo ops. There wasn't much revealed about that meeting. Could the answer lie there?
Well, I certainly think, and I would swap around the emphasis that General Hasnain has put and say that I think the reason for Xi Jinping not coming is definitely a message for India. And I think that for him to have come to India without any kind of breakthrough on the line of actual control and the continuing standoff would not have been something China would have seen as possible. And turn it around, would it be possible for Prime Minister Modi in these circumstances to travel to China while the armies are still faced off against each other at the line of actual control? So I think it is a message. I think the way that the Chinese delegations have been behaving at the G20, particularly since we saw India turn around that SCO summit into a virtual summit, is also another indicator. Because if President Xi Jinping had planned to come to India, then perhaps we would not have seen Chinese delegations blocking the joint statement on quite as many factors. Because it's not just, of course, the Ukraine paragraphs that are holding up the leaders' declaration at the G20 right now. It is, amongst other objections, China's objections on debt financing, the differences on climate, the differences on things like Sanskrit phrases like Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. We've seen and we've been hearing from Sherpas around the world about the kind of differences between the Indian and the Chinese side on a lot of these. If he was coming, I think the Chinese delegation may have been a little easier on these fronts. And I definitely think there is a message there. What his internal problems may be, perhaps we will find out in the due course of time. But it's certainly the internal happenings didn't stop him from being at the BRICS summit, from going to South Africa for a bilateral state visit as well, where he received this big medal. So it didn't stop him from doing all of those things. It hasn't stopped BRICS from having a joint statement. It hasn't stopped China from being a part of a joint statement at the East Asia Summit today in Indonesia. So I think a lot will depend when we see how the G20 works out this weekend. But I do think that there is a messaging from Beijing to Delhi about the fact, and India has said it too, that without some kind of a resolution at the LAC, relations can't be normal. I think that includes a visit by the head of state.
Are you saying? And by the way, there's one of our members of the Mojo community saying entirely agree with Ms. Haidar. For Xi Jinping to visit Johannesburg and Jakarta and skip New Delhi, it's a pointed
He didn't go to Jakarta.
India. Yeah,
he didn't go to Jakarta. Yeah, Premier Li Qiang went to that.
Correct. Just reading out the comment verbatim, so I caught that live. But it is a pointed indicator to India, to our place in the world. Now, you said it's a message. What's the message? Because you seem to be suggesting that it also suits India to not have him here.
I think certainly it would have been very difficult without some kind of an announcement at the LAC. And remember, just before the Johannesburg meeting, we saw many messages going out from the LAC. The 19th round of commanders meetings was followed by more talks between the major generals there, trying to find a resolution to what India is saying are really the last two sticking points at the line of actual control, so that they can at least go forward and say there is some kind of a resolution here. Without that in place, and look at how the Johannesburg meeting went out. And Barkha, I don't like to sound like a stuck record on your show, but I say this again and again. Why is there no transparency? Why does Prime Minister Modi feel it's okay to have this sofa set talk on the sidelines of a BRICS summit, but not have a proper bilateral with the Chinese side? Because then there would be note takers. Then there would be some understanding of what the two leaders agreed to. Here we had a situation where the Foreign Secretary of India says the two leaders have agreed to direct their officials for an expeditious resolution and disengagement and de-escalation. And the Chinese side says no such thing. So there's no accountability to that meeting that was held in Johannesburg. And you're quite right. There may be a message that emanated really from the way things went down there.
Harsh, Pant, let me bring you in at this point. A couple of other things that happened alongside. They're not surprising in themselves. The Chinese blocking, sanctions that India once moved at the United Nations. We saw our representative there lashing out at that. We also saw, very unusually, China's ambassador to Nepal being critical of India on camera. And then we saw politicians who tried to defend India, reportedly facing a mystery attack. All of this has happened in the last couple of days. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but what do you think is going on?
Barkha, I think there are two big picture issues here, which it would be interesting to think about. One is that India has finally started irritating China. This whole logic of India does not matter to China. India is secondary power. India does not, it's China and the Americans at play. I think now finally it is brass tacks time. And I think we are now irritating Chinese like we have never done before. And we see it everywhere. We see it bilaterally, we see it trilaterally, we see it regionally, as you were pointing out, we see it globally. And I think the other point is that India-China dynamic has gone global. It is now in SCO. It is now I think Indian Foreign Minister pointedly saying that, look, the only reason we are not in UNSC is because of China. You look at, of course, G20 is the primary forum as of now, what we are discussing. And I think what Suhasini was saying, to expect Chinese leader to be here when the Chinese have been so obstructionist throughout this entire process, seems to me quite extraordinary to me. I mean, I would not would expected China to come here, Chinese leader to come here, given what they were behaving throughout this process. So I think there is we should be patting ourselves back. We are doing something right. That we are irritating the Chinese. They are making a point of showing it off that India is getting under their skin. Now the question is, what happens now? Is there a way out? Because we have to, as two neighbors, deal with each other, and I don't think there is a way out as of now. So clearly, I think there is a point here that it's a mix of Chinese internal problems and India's ability to showcase its leadership at a time when clearly there is a leadership void at the global level, and India is. A lot of things that India is saying, for example, as part of its G20 process, that has become very, very visible. Like the whole global South issue. When it all started off, everyone was sniggering. Oh, what is this global South? It's back to usual non-alignment business and all that. Look at how everyone is now talking about global South. Chinese are saying global South. Russians are reaching to the Africans. You have an entire European and Western approach to outreach to the global South. G7 engage the global South. So I think Indian diplomacy should be credited with something that I think usually we do not do. That we are getting certain things right in our China policy. That is bilaterally and globally and regionally, Chinese are getting a message that India means business. India will go ahead and do things at its own terms, and Chinese will have to react. I think all of this time India was reacting. Now you see Chinese reacting. Things like missing out on G20 is a big deal. I think. Whether Chinese, whatever the argument Chinese put forth, at the end of the day, you are missing out on a very big ticket.
Are you suggesting, Harsh, that Xi Jinping's absence is something to do with the signals that India has sent, that we're just fine if you don't come? In fact, we'd prefer it.
I think so. It is. I think there are signals being sent all across. They are also sending us signals. We are also sending them signals. We are telling them, all right, if you want to be this obstructionist, then you will get a reception in India of a kind that perhaps you won't like. So I think coming to India and then, of course, figuring out that you are a bit lonely amongst the 19 odd other world leaders, that also something would be very irritating to the Chinese leader who likes to demonstrate that he's at the center of the global attention. Look how what he was doing in BRICS in Johannesburg. So he went there and there's a difference. Johannesburg was his field to play. New Delhi and Jakarta were not his fields to play. So he has decided not to come to Delhi, and he did not go to Jakarta because there is clearly a pushback from a number of countries. And I think India is at the heart of that contestation.
Yeah, that's a very interesting idea of the General Hasnain, the idea of Xi Jinping having come to Delhi and being lonely, as it were. Do you want to jump in there? Because when Harsh was suggesting that India has finally started getting under Beijing's skin, I saw you smiling at that in agreement. Go ahead.
Yes, Barkha, I did mention Chinese diplomatic capabilities, and we used to give a lot to them earlier. They somehow seem to outsmart a lot of people around the world. But it became very evident in the last couple of years that Chinese diplomacy is no great shakes. If you go back to 2020, with whatever happened in Galwan and along the LAC, I have always maintained that it was just an act of coercion which went berserk, which went wrong, over which China had no control at all. And actually, the Chinese were regretting it to a great extent because they really didn't know, they had not thought through this entire thing, and they didn't know where to take it beyond. This is exactly what Professor Harshpant is actually alluding to in a way, in the sense that it is Indian diplomacy which has come to the fore at the moment. And G20 has been a great opportunity. Last 10 months, ever since the Bali Summit in November 2022, ever since the last 10 months, 200 meetings, 100,000 people have come to India. The India story has been told around the world. If this was happening with a quiet China and with internal rumblings also taking place in China, obviously the leadership in China would be worried. And they would not like to add to India's stature by coming in here. I'm not so sure about the aspect of it being lonely here. Yes, to an extent, he would be lonely here because they've actually cut themselves into a corner. That is the thing with the status at which China is at the moment. But there is no doubt about it that India's rise has actually unnerved China to a great extent. I wrote on this and I found a tremendous pushback from a lot of readership in China trying to laugh at me and say, what, you mean to say India the Indian actions are going to worry China. That's why I continue to think that actually China is worried.
Before I come to Ambassador Hasnain, obviously your argument has provoked a kind of disagreement in this conversation, a limited disagreement, but still a disagreement. Do you want to jump in on why you are a little more cynical, obviously, about what's actually driving this absence?
Well, no, I think everyone does pretty much agree that Xi Jinping's absence at the Indian G20 is a message. It's a message of discomfort with India at this time. Now, you can see it from everywhere. I personally don't think Xi Jinping would be completely lonely. And to be honest, if you had seen the visuals from the BRICS summit, and Brazil and South Africa are certainly members of, and Russia are certainly members of the G20 as well. Or if you had seen, the Bali summit of last year that General Hasnain referred to, I don't think China is isolated as much as there is an increasing level of discomfort many countries have with the stance that China has taken. But when it comes to India and China, yes, this is a bilateral problem. It's a problem with armies facing off each other at the line of actual control, something that the two sides have not been able to resolve since April 2020. I don't think we can brush that under the carpet with this. And sure, as analysts, I'm sure we all love to pat ourselves on the back and say, India is responsible for having, shown China a thing or two. But I think at the end of the day, we do have to ask the basic question. India is the host of the G20. When three leaders don't show up, External Affairs Minister Jaishankar has quite rightly pointed out that several G20 summits happen and leaders don't show up. But here you have very specific reasons for leaders not showing up. And if Xi Jinping has gone to every G20, even the Rome one, which he missed because of COVID, he actually was part of it by a video conference, then the question does have to be asked, is this essentially a bilateral problem that India was not able to get over in order to bring all the guests together to the G20? So I think you can turn this argument any which way you want. There's no point saying that India is the host, but we didn't want the guests to come. At the end of the day, everybody wants a successful summit, which actually includes every possible guest that we can get.
Let me bring in Ambassador Sinha on that point. Yes, it is an interesting formulation to say we're the host, but we're going to be quite okay if one of our guests doesn't show up. And I know I don't mean to be reductionist about Professor Pant's argument, but I think that there is something to think about here. I think Suhasini is right. This is effectively right now a bilateral problem, and everybody has their own bilateral relations fashioned to their national interest, which is why Biden intriguingly said, "Oh, I was hoping to looking forward to meeting Xi Jinping." So everybody's going to run this bilaterally in the end. Ambassador Sinha.
Well, yes, the fact that China is uncomfortable with India's assertiveness, and this can be seen most clearly in the case of the Chinese map, where India was the first country to protest, and thereafter a host of countries have protested, including Japan. Now, I don't know, I can't go back and think how many times in the past so many countries have protested against China's maps, but this time it has. So, in a very dramatic way, India.
I mean, even the Russians. Yes,
and they also, of course, China claims their island as well, and a lot of the territory in Manchuria. So there is this factor clearly that China is irritated with India, and China would like to send a message. The point really is that would she have come to India and try and upstage the conference, or at least represent Russia's point of view and Putin's point of view at the conference to ensure that the conference did not go the way the US and the West would want it to. A confident Xi Jinping would still have come to India despite all these difficulties. Why he's not coming to India, I feel, is one of the reasons is that he's not feeling comfortable, whether in terms of the Chinese function of the Chinese economy, China's other troubles, and also the problems that are there within the party itself, which is why it is not just the G20 that he's not coming to. He's not gone to the ASEAN summit either, where in any case he would have been. And Indonesia is a fairly neutral country. Indonesia, of course, has refused to apply for BRICS, but otherwise Indonesia has been extremely conscious and concerned about China's sensitivities. If you look at the declaration they have adopted, they have not even referred to the South China Sea issue. So Indonesia is extremely concerned about that. So even there, Xi Jinping did not go. So the fact that China's internal problems have made Xi Jinping a little uncomfortable of trying to come to Delhi and take center stage here, even at a time when Prime Minister Modi as host would be the key person in the meeting. But nonetheless, with all the other world leaders around, Xi Jinping holding bilateral meetings with Kishida or with President Biden or with the other leaders would put him up as a world leader, which he is. But the fact that he's uncertain of his own position and the difficulties that
So you continue to believe it's more internal than external, the reason for his absence?
Yes, I think he's not coming. He's certainly irritated with India. He's certainly sending a message across to India, and that was seen in the BRICS summit itself. But thereafter, the lack of confidence comes from his internal problems.
Harsh Pant, let me bring you in on that. You said good for India. We've finally begun to irritate the Chinese, and I think every Indian would agree that it's great that if we're irritating the Chinese. But to Ambassador Sinha's point, the absence of the ASEAN summit in Jakarta, where there is no evident friction with the host country, how do we then juxtapose that absence with this absence?
But look, even the Indonesians have objected to the map, and even 3 odd countries in ASEAN have objected to the map. So I think Chinese are irritating countries everywhere. I mean, I agree with General Hasnain was pointing out the diplomacy. See, a few years back, Barkha, everyone was gaga over Chinese diplomacy. Everyone was saying, "Oh, how fantastic Chinese are doing globally." So I think there needs to be some course correction here, that they were not doing very well actually. We were overestimating their confidence, and I think that aggression that they've shown is really now being reflected in the way countries are pushing back. Now, India, of course, India is not in any way claiming that we are a global power equal to China, but I think India has done something interesting. India has made G20 its very own. We have owned G20 in ways that no other country owned it. We have taken it to so many levels, and we have done something very interesting with it in terms of conversation that it has generated. And the fact that we have been able to bring out the aspirations of the global South on the global agenda is also a reflection of the way we have portrayed our concerns and linking those concerns with the wider world. So I think we are navigating a world where great power contestation is a reality, and China's rise is a reality. No one is saying here that we are on par with China, but the question is, what do you do when you have Chinese almost not reconciling to the fact that there is an India that they have to reckon with? At the end of the day, if you see, even before Galwan, what was Chinese response? I mean, we were trying very hard. You had the entire Wuhan spirit and Mamlapuram engagement. And I mean, many in India would question that. What did we gain out of that? Even that point, people were criticizing Prime Minister Modi. Why is he doing this? What is there in Wuhan? What is there in Mamlapuram? Why are we engaging with China? So today, I think the question is, foreign policy is not a one-way street. It's also what other sides does to you. And today, what Chinese are doing to India is actually very evident. How many stakeholders are there for China in India today? They are losing stakeholders. Even the communist parties of China won't speak in favor of China publicly today. So I think the question that we have to ask is, why is it that such a rapid deterioration has happened? Of course, we can't live with that. Something has to give, because it's the largest neighbor, largest economy, big power. But I think conceptually and analytically, I don't see any point in saying that, oh, Chinese are not coming to G20, therefore G20 is a disaster. I mean, I think we have to look at what we are going to do with G20. What is our agenda with G20? We can't have Chinese deciding what the G20 agenda is going to be or how G20 is going to perform. So I think it's ultimately for India to make a point there and say that, look, we knew from the very beginning that there are fault lines. We knew from the very beginning that there is going to be polarization. And from the very beginning, as the ministerial tracks were progressing, Chinese were very obstructionist. So clearly, we had to live with that, that we have to find a way out. So if the Chinese are not coming at the end of the day, I don't think it's India's fault.
Yeah, I don't think it's about anyone thinking it's India's fault. It's about, so Hasnain, maybe you can come in there since you believe, and then I'll come right to General Hasnain. I don't think it's about India's fault. It's about whether the G20 in any way, I don't want to use the word diminishes, but it receives a tiny knock with the absence of Xi Jinping.
Well, I think just the fact that Xi Jinping has made an effort to go to every G20 since he took over in 2013, and he's not coming to India, speaks for itself. I just want to clarify one point. Although there were rumors that Xi Jinping would perhaps go for the East Asia Summit, actually, East Asia Summit is always attended to by the Chinese premier, not the Chinese president. In fact, the rumors, I think, were fueled especially by the fact that there may have been some kind of détente between India and China. It is actually the US president who downgraded his attendance at the East Asia Summit this year by sending Vice President Kamala Harris instead. He had attended the EAS last year. I just wanted to clarify that it is normally the premier who goes to Indonesia. As far as how this affects India's G20, Barkha, at the end of the day, as I said, every guest counts. It is nice to get a full house. It's nice to get everybody that you invite coming to India. I think the second place where it could affect is the idea of the joint statement itself, because when leaders come together, it is easier to get them on the table and for the host country's leader to push them through the last mile, just as we saw in Indonesia last year, particularly when you have this very fractious situation over the Ukraine paragraphs, the Bali paragraphs, or what is called paragraph 6 now, which is on geopolitical issues, which is now the sticking point between them. So that's the second place where there is some kind of loss because one of the big leaders does not come. After all, if the P5 are part of the G20 and two of the P5 are not coming, then it changes it. And I think the third place where if you were to look for where India does, in a sense, lose something by the fact that all the leaders are not coming is because the government has made a point of saying India is a balancing power. It is a balancing power between the East and the West, the global North and the global South. If half that balance is not coming, and by that I mean Russia, China, because today the big, great global polarization is between the Russia-China combine on one side and the G7, if you like, on the other, you are actually looking at a slightly imbalanced group of people who are coming to this summit, as in you're not getting the one half of that balance. But I do agree with the others that at the end of the day, this is about India's G20, India's priorities at this G20, the African Union membership, for example, and other great priorities that India has put forward for the world. But I think the real issue is going to be on the joint declaration, because no G20 summit so far has failed to produce a leaders' declaration. And if there is no leaders' declaration come Sunday, then the question is going to be: is this a question about India, or is it about a question about the future of the G20 itself?
Okay, let me take that in last comments to Ambassador Sinha and General Hasnain. To Ambassador Sinha, one of the points that Suhasini makes about the balancing power, people like yourselves, diplomats like yourselves, have actually argued that stop being the balancing power. Walk out of the SCO. Like, I remember talking to you at that time, and I think the point you made was, why are we being this balancing power? What would you say to that? And would India now continue to be that balancing power, or would there be a greater tilt towards one side, which is the West?
Well, whether we like it or not, we will have to tilt towards that side, because the fact is that China is using organizations like the SCO and BRICS as building blocks for its own international order, China-dominated international order. And China not coming here to New Delhi is not just a snub to India, but also to the G20 itself. Because the G20 deals with global issues, global economic issues. And China not being there is a message that China is not interested in dealing with these matters, considering the fact that one of the factors of the current economic crisis is China itself, where there is a fear in the West that China will try to get out of its economic slowdown by exporting its problem. And that means that, and on the other issue, the issue of debt relief, again, China is the obstructionist power. So the process of deglobalization had started much before India took over the presidency of the G20, but now it has become much more acute. And in this G20 meeting, this is being reflected by the fact that the Russia-China combine is not present. So yes, the future of G20 especially if there is no declaration 2 days from now, then there will be a question mark on G20 itself. And there, India will have to clearly choose that India cannot be possibly with the Russia-China combined because of their attitude. India will have to go along with the majority of the G20 members and try and solve global problems in the best way that they can.
Very interesting. General Hasnain, let me give you the last word. I think Harsh's Bijli went, so we lost him there, but let me give you the last word. And to pick up what both Suhasini and Ambassador Sinha have said about the possibility of there being no declaration and the Ukraine sort of difference of opinion not fully explaining that. Would that actually diminish the G20 as a concept if that happens?
I don't expect a statement on Ukraine to be by consensus to be there at all. I have my doubts it's going to come, because there is a tremendous pushback taking place on the dilution of anything which was said in those two famous paragraphs from the Bali Declaration. There is tremendous pushback by the EU, by the United States, UK, and all of them. But having said that, let me introduce one last element into this. Whatever has to be said, whatever was to be said by Xi Jinping or by Mr. Putin will be said by the Russian foreign minister and by the Chinese foreign minister.
So Hasnain was reminding us that, we've been saying absence of China. It's the absence of Xi and not the absence of China. But
absolutely, I mean, they're all there. But I think such meetings into which a lot is invested, and India has invested a hell of a lot in it. In such meetings, the absence of personalities such as Mr. Putin and Xi Jinping obviously robs the event of its, romantic value to a great extent. Because there is a romance attached to that diplomatic event. It's one of the biggest events. In case of India, it's after 40 years, 1983, that we had Chogam and Nam, and now it is 2023. So, having said that, by simply not appearing, just having a no-show, there is also a diplomatic message going out that they would prefer to rob, not from Mr. Putin's side. Mr. Putin has obviously spoken to Mr. Modi just a few days ago, but from the Chinese side, it appears that there is an attempt to rob India of that little element of an achievement, a final success of 200 meetings, 100,000 people having attended those meetings, 60 cities having been involved. No country in the world has taken G20 as seriously as India has done. And at the end of it, I think Xi did not want to cement that success.
So not wanting to share space in the arc lights that would have been owned by India is your last word. We'll leave it there. Let's see what happens over the next 72 hours. It is going to be an interesting time, and interesting is an understatement. Thank you very much, Ambassador Sinha, Suhasini Haidar, to General Hasnain, and to Professor Harsh Pant for joining us. Do watch our special coverage on the G20 Summit right here at Mojo Story, starting tomorrow and through Sunday. Thank you very much for watching, and see you soon. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalism.